Sabbath school. Did you all have a good week? Yeah? It was busy. Yeah. Anything you want to report on what happened to you, or anything special, or you saw God work in your life, or? Oh yeah.
Remember, and it broke the limbs off. And then Betty had some pruners come in to try to shape them up, and they just went wild. So we're delighted to have the trees replaced, the ones that were looking bad.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Keep it.
It's nice that we have that ability to do that here.
Yes, indeed.
Used to be, you just cut down trees, and
Yes.
I didn't know when I was growing up, we had nurseries for trees. Oh, I don't know that I'm assuming you're a bit older than I am. In your day, when you were growing up, did they have that many nurseries?
Almost 90.
Yeah. So yeah. Anything else? I had something strange happen to me today. Or this week, I should say. I had to go, as you know, we all know this in this area, there's probably going to be a strike next week for the UAW, okay? So we've got some problems. We've increased volumes. We're trying to basically store cars for when they're not being built. So I had to travel way up into Canada to a supplier this week. And even when you're traveling, you still have to go to the meetings. But, I have the car phone. I can just talk in meetings. I just tell them I can't see anything, but I can talk to the issues. Beg your pardon?
Does this affect you a lot if they strike? Is that going to be
Oh yeah, it's going to affect us. It's for a while. I mean, it won't affect us for immediately, but when we start running out of cars that we built up in place of it, yeah, it'll affect me somewhat. But anyways, I'm on the phone. I'm north of Toronto. I'm on the phone. I feel something strange in my mouth. Kind of bite down. It hurts. And then a crown came off right in the middle. And wouldn't you know, I dropped it. So sitting on the floor in my car. So my tooth is hurting a little bit. I had a, pardon? Oh yeah, I found it. But I went into the place in Toronto, and we had a production demonstration run, and I said, this is going to be the fastest production demonstration run in history, because I called the dentist. He said, he's in Plymouth. He says, I can get there by 5:30. He can put that thing back on. I'm in Toronto. Yeah, so we did a 3-hour production demonstration run, looked at everything, got in my car, raced home. The border took me almost like 40 minutes to get across, because I don't know what it was, but I got in there and I got the crown back on and everything's fine. So
Wonderful.
yeah, I was happy, but when that happened, I'm looking, this is just what I need right now. Yep. I stopped the car, I searched and got the crown out and that kind of thing. It was an interesting event this week.
In a foreign country, too.
Yeah, oh yeah. You can't really drink. I'm trying to drink water on one side so it doesn't hit the crown, the tooth, the stump that's bare and stuff. I said, if Ontario police see me in my car drinking like this, they're going to think something's wrong. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir.
I have been pulled over for speeding by the Ontario police, and they are very, very nice. But they still will write you a ticket, and it's not a cheap ticket, and you have to pay it online. So, okay. Any prayers? Anybody we need to pray for, or anything?
Sandy Cap's sister, Lori, is in the hospital in Southfield.
Is she doing okay?
I don't know. She went in. She's scheduled for surgery Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure. Betty's the one that keeps up with that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else?
Broke both legs and, both bones in one leg, the second week of school. So, she broke 2 bones in one leg, yeah. So if we could pray for her and her recovery.
What was her name again?
Her name is Jessica.
That's what I thought.
It was at school. Yeah, we splinted and we sent her off.
Those things happen. Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I had a Bible study going with a family, but then their daughter is getting a divorce and moved into the home and has multiple children, and it's a small home, and they felt the need to cancel the Bible study because of too much going on in the house. Just pray that some kind of resolution will be worked out so that we can continue.
Yeah. 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 It's it's weird. When I was growing up, my father couldn't wait for me to get out on my own. But now, I don't mind. I miss my girls. I kind of want them home, but they don't want to stay.
Well, you're a man.
Yes. But I guess they always do, something happens, you gotta, I can understand the parents. But let's hope the Bible study, because in these kind of things, the kid or the daughter may hear it, and they may want to join in, and so it just gets multiplied. This may be the Lord's working, kind of under the current and so forth. Anybody else? I got one. I have an aunt who's got liver failure. I'd like to pray for her. And I have a family reunion actually coming up next weekend, and my brother and sisters haven't seen each other in a while, and usually it doesn't go good. So I hope this does go well. Yeah, pray for peace. Okay. All right, why don't we have a prayer here? Oh, I'd also want to pray for the potential strike. If this strike is prolonged, it will hurt the economy in this area. In fact, it could send the whole country into a recession. So that it gets resolved, or it gets resolved so they don't go on strike, because no one wants to see that happen.
It's going to hurt the profits here as the people going on strike. I mean, it's Congress.
Yes. Yeah, you'd think that grown people could come to an agreement, but it doesn't seem to happen often, unfortunately. Okay. Dear Heavenly and gracious Father, we're so thankful that you can be here with us this Sabbath, and we can understand thy word here in Ephesians. We ask you to be with those we are praying for. For Laura, who's having surgery, may you guide the surgeon's hands. May she recover and come out of this well. For Jessica, who broke her leg in 2 places, may she return to school. May the bones mend, and may she be better than ever. For the Bible study that seems to be broken up by family strife, may they realize they need you in that home, and that they want to continue the Bible study. And if it is your will, that please reach those children and that daughter. Lord, we ask that you give us peace. We ask that you help my aunt who's in hospice. that you give her peace and know that you are with her. And for the potential strike that's happening, may those in charge feel your will and come to a conclusion. And may they know that it's bigger than, many things are bigger than just what they want. In thy name forever. Amen. Okay. You know, I kind of knew I was on duty for Sabbath school, but because of the events and so forth and where I was having to do, when I finally got back, I thought, oh, I got to do my lesson. I've had a lot going on, Jill will tell. And it was Labor Day weekend to boot on top of that. So hope you all had a good Labor Day. But when I looked at the lesson, practicing supreme loyalty to Christ, I want to ask you, when it says, can you give me an example of a supreme loyalty? Supreme loyalty.
Oh, supreme loyalty.
Being loyal.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would say loyalty until death, and the greatest example I can think of right now is Jesus' loyalty to his Father and to his mission.
Oh, yeah.
When he was in the Garden of Eden and the crisis came to him even before the cross. But he said, nevertheless, not my will, but thine.
Thine, yes. That was an example of extreme loyalty. It's the ultimate example of extreme loyalty. For the God of heaven to come down in human form and to give up his humanity forever. You know, I'm reading in my devotions the book of Daniel, when Daniel sees Jesus, you know, and it describes him. Eyes of flames, bronze. You know, you're looking at this and like, that's a magnificent being. And when you think that Jesus gave that up and he became human in our state, the way we are now, not human as Adam and Eve were, and he gave that up to be with us. You know, that's quite amazing. That's a loyalty I couldn't imagine, you know. I mean, if someone were to, if God were to ask you to trade places with someone that's severely handicapped, would you do that? I don't know that I would have the courage to do that. But that's kind of what God asked of his own son. And the other,
That's a great example, I believe. It's Christ's loyalty to his father-in-law. That's all.
his father-in-law?
His father's 10 Commandments.
Oh, it's 10. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Lived an entire life without sin. That's unbelievable.
Little. You know, I've thought about that too in the past and think, how could, if there's a way we can do that, and I think if you try to keep the 10 Commandments out of your own willpower or your own desire just to keep the 10 Commandments, number one, you're not going to be able to do it. And two, you kind of turn the 10 Commandments into something it shouldn't be. You know, the 10 Commandments, as it says, is a mirror. You know, you look at it and I know sin.
Well, now that you're bringing that point up, I'm reading Mark for my devotions, and in it, it is at that point where the rich young man came, asked what he needed to do to be saved. You know, it was giving up his wealth that had usurped God. Mm-hmm. And the disciples, of course, being amazed, are like, well, then how can anybody be saved? And that's when Jesus said, through Christ, through God, all things can be done. Yeah. That's what that text means. We tend to use it for all other kinds of things, but it really means salvation is only through God's grace. Right. We can be saved. We can't keep the 10 Commandments perfectly.
But I think, no, we can't, but I think I found something. It's easier, okay. If a stranger would have asked me to do something, I would look at him and say, who are you to ask me to do something? Okay? But if my wife or daughter asks me to do something, a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I'll go do that, and I'll get up and I'll do that. Without thinking. I just do it. What's the difference? Relationship. And it's not just that. I love my wife and my daughter.
It may be fear.
Well, no, it's not fear. I think fear is a very bad motivator. Because if you fear something and you do it out of fear, what are you going to do? You're going to do it your best, or you're going to do just the amount that'll get you by. Okay? I mean, think about it. But if you love someone, you go and do your best. And I think that's the key. If you really love God, and he says, keep my commandments, okay, then I'm going to do it. The motivation is based on love. I can do that. You know, it's the difference between just doing something and doing something out of love. In Jesus' day, there were a lot of Pharisees who kept the Ten Commandments, or supposedly did, but they didn't do it out of love. Yeah. And that's the thing. Unless you really love God, you can't keep the Ten Commandments, can you? And what worse, it makes the Ten Commandments an idol, which means, again, you've broken the first and the second. It's not a good thing. I think I better, now that they've come, I better move back up to the podium. When we started, there were just people there. Yes, you can. Okay. Now, what's some other ways of extreme loyalty? Next week's lesson we'll get into this, but don't soldiers have to practice extreme loyalty? I mean, I've never been in the military, but I've heard what it's like. You know, my brother was in there. He told me you run everywhere. You even run in place. You know, you have to salute. You have to say yes, sir, yes, sergeant. There are a lot of requirements you have to do, right? And what's worse, if they send you into battle and they tell you to do something that's going to get you killed, and you don't do it, you can be arrested, can't you?
Or killed anyway.
Or killed anyways, yes. That's an extreme.
They tell me that's why commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers carry sidearms. They don't put this on the news, but a pistol or a handgun is not good for long-range shooting.
No, it isn't.
So you can guess why he carries a sidearm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a lot of history and so forth, and if in the battle, if the enlisted figure, the officer or the non-commissioned was going to get them killed, they usually took care of them real quick. Anyways, that's an example of extreme loyalty. We're Seventh-day Adventists. What does that mean, extreme loyalty to us? Christ and his word. All right, that's a good point. Let me ask you something. We were known as people of the book. We were known as, if you were a Seventh-day Adventist, and you told that to somebody, they used to say, that person knows their Bible. Is that true anymore, you think? Do you think that's true anymore? Alvin's got his hand up back there.
It may not be as true as it used to be for everyone, but as we get closer and closer to what we call the end of time, it will become more apparent to us who are really serious to be studiers and doers of the word. It will mean a whole lot more.
Yep. I'm sorry, I go off on tangents, and now I just thought of a tangent. I tell stories. A few years ago, I was then working in a group in vehicle development, and we had a boss who really loved the Detroit Tigers. The Detroit Tigers were playing the Yankees to get into World Series. They were playing the American League pennant. So he knew I liked baseball too, so he sends me a text message. We're all meeting at the Grand Tavern to watch the Yankees game. Show up there. Now, I have no problem conversing with my colleagues at a tavern. I don't partake of what's being served there. And I called Jill. I said, hey, I'm not going to be home late. The group's going to get together. We're going to watch the Tigers. So we all went in there. And one of my colleagues said her husband was coming. So her husband, who doesn't work in the group, was going to show up. He shows up, and she introduces me to him. And she says, just one thing to remember about Matt, he's really religious. And I thought to myself, what? Religious? How many would like to be described that way? You would? I don't think you want somebody. You'd like to be described as religious. I didn't like it.
Why?
Well, I'll tell you why in a second, but Gil's got his hand up.
I just wanted to say in favor of Dick Lane that being labeled as really religious is a lot better than that guy is no good, dirty, and rotten. And, and I'm thinking that many labels you cannot avoid. If you sit in a meeting and you're not drinking beer or whatever, or using profanity, and then people say, why don't you do that? And you explain why, then they're going to put a label on you. And I noticed that my neighbors who somehow watch movements, you know, they said, while you were sitting in church on Saturday morning, I came over here and killed that rodent. I go, okay. Well, I gave them decent burial. And I'm thinking, the people watch your movements, they watch what you do and how you do it and what you say. So you can't help but being described as who you really are.
That depends on why the person called me religious. If they were saying I was being a hypocrite, then I wouldn't like to be called religious. But if they were saying I was godly, I was a nice person, then I'd like it.
Yeah. Well, would you describe people of the Islamic faith who go out, go on the Hajj, do all these things as being religious? That's what I didn't like. She, I had the impression, thought I was kind of just works-oriented. If she would have said, he really knows Jesus, he's a loving Christian, I would have took that. But when she said I was religious, I suddenly thought, am I a Pharisee?
How do I know how loving you are? Oh, sorry. Thank you, sir. How does anyone know how loving you are or how devoted? They know by your deeds, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way you behave tells people that you are very devout something or other, and that's how I know my Muslim neighbors devout, because they wear the proper garments and the stuff that I wouldn't want to wear. And they gave me a box of Godiva chocolates and an orchid, so I think they must be very religious. Okay.
Oh.
I think loyalty and religious can have different meanings. Religious can mean you're very works-oriented, as you've mentioned. You do your beads, and you do your 10,000 steps, and you don't eat this, and you don't eat that. But why are you doing those? Makes a difference.
It does.
If they said you were devoted or godly, that's different. There's a love element in there that the religious word may not have. And then also loyalty. I think we can learn something from animals. Eagles mate for life.
That's right.
We humans have a hard time with that, at least lately.
Yep.
And German shepherds and dogs. I heard a story this week about a German shepherd. His master took him to Russia, and he had to leave, and they wouldn't allow the master to take him on the plane because he didn't have a certain veterinary clearance. And so the dog waited at the airport. He let the dog go free.
Oh, he just abandoned the dog?
Yes, he did. There was no other choice. He had a meeting to get to in another country. He took the dog out of his crate before, right where they were going to put it on the plane and let him go free. And there was a man living at the end of the airport in a trailer. And the man took him in, fed him. Every time an airplane came in, that dog was out there. He sat right where the ramp came down, watching. He did that for 6 years.
That, last Sabbath, that's another story I'm getting off to. Last Sabbath, we have our Jeep. You know, you can put the top down, and we just like to go and drive in the wind, and, you know, it's kind of therapeutic, believe it or not. We find it. So we're driving around, and on the, where is it, honey? On the corner of 11 Mile and 11 Mile and Milford, there's a little cemetery. We drove by it, and I said, it looks like a military cemetery. So we stopped. And you know what that is? It's a military cemetery for dogs that have served in the military and service dogs. And you read the tributes that their owners wrote about those dogs. Oh, yeah, we texted our daughter Madison. We said, hey, look what we found. And she goes, oh, that's so sad. You know, and if you go to other military cemeteries, you'll see coins on the graves of the men there. Like, you know, a penny means you visited, a nickel, I think a quarter, you were there when they died, you know. And people had left coins on these dogs' graves. And I just couldn't believe it. But when you read the things of the extreme loyalty that these dogs had for their owners, and their owners' love for these dogs, it's just amazing. And like you say, I couldn't have done that. I could not have just let my dog go. I would have said, then guess what? I'm staying here until we get this dog out of here, because that's how I feel about my dogs. They're part of the family, you know.
They are family members.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you saw that, was kind of an amazing thing, this kind of extreme loyalty. Extreme loyalty to Christ and our church. Should they be different, or should they be one and the same?
I would say they are not the same. At some point, thank you. Some point in life, people need to recognize the difference between an institution and a person or a principle or God. And there are institutions, and listening to preachers, I've learned that the ecclesia church, that is the collection of people who have given themselves to Christ and to God, the ecclesia spreads across denominational boundaries. And many times loyalty to institutions can lead you to behave in manners that may not be in harmony with what God wants. And that is demonstrated in the life of Jesus. How loyal was he to the institution that was representing God on planet Earth when he was here?
Well,
and that's what got him killed.
Well, it was partly what got him killed, yes.
Part of what it was.
Yeah, but he was, as I see it, he went to the Passovers, right?
Yes.
He went to the feast days.
Yes. That was God's command.
Yes.
But the church, the people who were serving God, quote unquote, at that time, were people who had moved away from the original intent that God had for them.
That's the good thing, the original intent. You know, Jesus said to the Pharisees, do what they tell you, but don't do what they do. Yeah. Yeah. And that's significant. But I do believe, how many here people believe this is God's remnant church and last day church? Okay? I believe it is. But I also believe one of the reasons it stays God's remnant and last day church is members like you keep it on the straight and narrow. okay? It's not the leadership. It's us here. We should do what they tell us to do as long as it's in line with what's in the Bible. And if we see something not going in line with the Bible, then maybe we should gently prod them and say, hey, I don't like what's going on. And you can do it in such a way as not be mean. You can send a note or a message or so forth like that. This is a day of instant communication. I get really frustrated with my overseas counterparts for my company. They send me notes in the emails. I don't know if you have this also. You get notes from these guys, and you're like, first of all, where did you get my name? and then they ask you for things. This is not my job. You know, you tell them, why don't you go and contact this person? And then they well, do you have his number or his email? I'm like, look it up. I mean, the systems are easy, you know, but it's almost like they want to be spoon-fed, right? Yeah. Oh, I'll do that too, but when they want me to look up specs in the system for them, I just like, no, you have access to that. Yes. So that kind of thing, it frustrates me. Anyways. Now, we get into some things here that people are uncomfortable with in this particular lesson. The institution of slavery. Slavery is wrong, right? Any way, shape, and form. And yet God allowed it, right? You have a different opinion, Gil?
I'm trying to be loyal to what is right. And that statement you just made corresponds to what's in the lesson. We know that slavery is an evil, and that's not a true statement. If it were, God would have told his prophets to say so in the Holy Scripture. And both slavery and polygamy are not prohibited by the Bible.
Okay.
But they are by our culture. So it's fashionable to line up with the culture and do the politically correct thing and call slavery an evil thing and call polygamy adultery, and it's not. And slavery is not evil in itself, but slave masters can be evil and cruel, or they can be kind and loving. Abraham had servants. We call them servants rather than slaves, but they didn't have other jobs. So, and then when I went into the military, I had 2 draft notices, okay?
2?
2 of them, because I didn't make the first one, so they sent me another one, said without fail. So then I ran to the Air Force and got in as an aviation cadet, and I was a slave for 2 years, 1 month, and 8 days. Yeah, I remember each one of them.
Oh, okay. So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying here.
I think Gil used 2 very important terms in describing the biblical ones. There is a monumental difference between a servant and a slave.
Ah.
A slave has no rights. They are forced. They have no free will. A servant is essentially a modern-day version of what we do for our employers. We're there, we're voluntary, but can leave at any point. They're there, they have rights. So the difference between a servant, we are servants for Christ. We are not slaves to Christ. We are slaves to sin, but servants to Christ.
Okay. I kind of agree with that, what you're saying. I guess what I'm, better? It's better to be.
I no longer call you servants, but friends.
Well, he did do that. He did call brothers. He said to his disciples, you're no longer disciples or servants, you're my friends. They, kind of like they got a promotion, didn't they? And like I think you're right. We are slaves to sin, which is a tragedy that I find myself repeating all the time. But I do believe that God allowed certain things that were wrong, that were sins, such as divorce. Did not God, a good example is divorce. What did Jesus say to his disciples about divorce? He said, no, it's wrong. Unless there's adultery, there's no reason for divorce. I allowed it, yes.
What is the difference between multiple divorces and remarriage or another marriage and polygamy? Is it just a matter of culture?
I don't know. I don't understand. I mean, I can understand why people get divorced if they're being abused, or if somebody had an affair on somebody and those kinds of things. But getting divorced for the reason we're just not compatible anymore, which a lot of people do, I don't understand that. You know, maybe that's why somebody said I was religious, because I take things more seriously than that. Did you have your hand up?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I thought you did. Oh, okay. All right. But
That's a good point you made. Thank you. The Bible actually says that God hates divorce. And Jesus, when he was here, expanded that by saying because of the hardness of our hearts, Moses allowed it because Moses had to manage people.
yeah,
And that's one of the tragedies of people, that when you have to manage people, a lot of the ideal things disappear. And God has to deal with people. He brought his people out of slavery and brought them into a free land. But if you read your Bible, God gives instructions for how to manage slavery. It's in the Bible. And if he gives instruction of how to manage slavery, it tells me God knew there was slavery among his people, and he says, here's what you do to manage it. And I think that as a lone voice, I will say that we do not, some of us, do not believe that slavery is intrinsically evil, but because I was in the Air Force and I know that I was not free to walk off, okay, I end up in jail. And so I'm thinking that we need to realize that there are certain things that are countercultural, against our culture, but are not. And by the way, this is news to a lot of people. In 2010 in Atlanta, the General Conference voted to allow a chief who had 5 or 6 wives to be baptized without divorcing 4 of the 5 wives.
Yeah.
And see, in the old days, that was worse. You know, dump 4 or 5 wives to get baptized. So the General Conference voted to accept that, and people go, what? Well, that's because the culture is polygamous.
yes, yes. Now, do you know that the abolitionist movement to end slavery in the United States was a religious movement? It was directed by the northern evangelical churches. Pardon? Ellen White was part of that. And so was Detroit. Yeah. Underground Railroad ended these places and so forth. Do you know that most of the successful social movements in this country started out as religious movements? Women's suffrage started out in the churches, the women's temperance movement. It was a religious movement of the churches. Martin Luther King's the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. was who? He was a Baptist preacher, right? These things started out as church movements.
It would have started out as church movements because that's where everybody gathered.
Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily a religious thing. It's just that on Sunday morning, everybody was going to church. Even if they partied all night, they're going to church. Church was packed.
Yeah.
Okay, when I became an Adventist, if you were going to City Temple, if you thought you were going to have a seat, you needed to be at Sabbath school at 9 o'clock, not even 9:15 for song service, because there was not going to be a seat. So those things happened because that's where everybody was.
Oh, yeah. But they were reading things that said what?
Well, they were reading things too that were saying it was wrong.
It was wrong,
But
yeah.
they would have been there. The people
Pardon?
The bigger thing was that everybody was going to be there. You didn't have to call a meeting because they were having a meeting.
Oh, I understand. You had a meeting and you had an audience and they listened to a man who was going to give them a good message. And men that said, you know what, this is wrong, we need to stand up and we need to stop this. And people took it to heart. That, yeah, when he went to synagogue and he preached and so forth. And so forth. What I'm trying to say is, what I'm trying to ask, what kind of movements should our church have to help correct things today? To help influence society today? My wife and I, recently, we have Netflix. It's sometimes hard to find good stuff on Netflix. But we found a documentary, it's on there right now, about the Blue Zones. And guess who they talk about? The Adventists in Loma Linda. Right there. And they mention how important church is to these people's health and well-being. How important the Sabbath is. I was shocked. Here's a guy that, you know what he described us? He described us as an off-branch of the Methodists. I thought, he hasn't looked at this very well. Ellen White was Methodist, but William Miller was not. Yes, yeah. Oh, I know, but this is what this guy on this thing described us at, and I thought, here is a movement that we have for health that could influence everybody in the country positively and can be used as a way to bring them to Christ. And this is, you got somebody else who's not an Adventist who's preaching it.
Another area is religious liberty.
Yes. Yes. How many of us take that for granted in this country? We do, because we've always had it. But in other countries, it's, if you were to go to England, the official church is the Church of England. They tolerate other religions, but that's the official church. And I think it might be that way in Canada too. Here in the United States, we don't tolerate other religions. We say they are free to worship as their conscience directs. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't want that. You know, but as Adventists, like you say, religious liberty is important. And in fact, I think it was Adventists who kept this, who stood up and kept this country from being proclaimed a Christian nation in an act of law, an act of Congress. We are a nation of Christians, I believe that, but we also are a nation that allows religious freedom and so forth. Yeah, go ahead.
Early writings, I think it's 120, paragraph 4. In a special sense, Seventh-day Adventists have been set in the world as watchmen and light bearers. To them has been entrusted the last warning to the perishing world. They have been given a work of the most solemn import, the proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' messages. There is no other work of so great importance. They are to allow nothing else to absorb their attention. Those are pretty strong words, are they not? So how many times a year should we be talking about in Sabbath school and in church about the three angels' messages? Once, twice?
All the time.
Maybe 3 times?
Okay. Yep.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering that if we were not a minority, a significant minority, how much would we champion religious liberty? So I use the Matt Simon philosophy. If you don't have data, you just have another opinion. So go to either cities or countries where Adventists have become a majority and find out how they behave toward other denominations. And you'll find the post office closed in some areas where where you have predominantly Adventists, and you have the politicians are Seventh-day Adventists or married to Seventh-day Adventists, and you'll find essentially a bias toward the Seventh-day Adventist religion and low tolerance toward
Other
others.
faiths?
Yeah.
So
So I'm just saying, this idea that Adventists supporting religious liberty may be because of self-preservation.
Well, oh, I can see that happening in a, I would hope, it is my fond hope that this country become majority Adventist. But I would hope that we would stand for religious liberty for other people. That if you want to work on Sabbath, that's okay. If you're not an Adventist. Well, how many have been to the western side of the state? Okay? I had a colleague from England one time, and he used to love to go motorcycling on the weekends. And he came back because I guess maybe he knew I was religious. He was trying to figure out. He goes, I was in Holland, Michigan, Sunday morning. Well, he couldn't buy beer. What? That's the blue law.
I'll take it a step further, Matt. I grew up in Holland. I remember going to Meyer on a Sunday morning, and they had the silver things down in front of all the liquor sales and things like that. That was normal.
Yeah, and he asked me, I thought you practiced religious freedom here. And I go, yeah, it's blue law. They're a little crazy over in Holland about this. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure, you know. But to me, that's silly. If you don't believe the way I do, I think you should be allowed to sell and do things on those days, you know.
When we think about religious freedoms, we think of it in current tenses. But I was reared in Pennsylvania, and my uncle became a Seventh-day Adventist way back in early 1900s. There was a tent meeting in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and that's where he became a Seventh-day Adventist. Well, there was a little church on the hill that he used to go to all of his life. And one Sunday morning, he was out hoeing in his garden, and some people were walking by to go to church, and they were offended by the fact that he no longer went to that church and that he was working on their Sabbath. So they called the constable, and he was taken into jail. Whether he had to stay there for any length of time, I do not know. But religious freedoms can be taken away from you in an instant.
Mm-hmm. That's unfortunate, but it has happened.
What about religious freedoms for homosexuals or bisexuals?
Okay. This is an issue I wanted to get later into, but I guess we're here now.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think sexual matters should be taken care of in the home privately and not in public.
Yeah, I agree.
I know they're making public laws about it, and that makes it very difficult. Also, I think values are taught in the home. Are you going to give your children religious freedom? If they don't want to come to church, do you allow them not to come to church? And what age do you do that? The home is the school, it is the government, and they get the home, they've got everything. They've got the nation, they've got the world.
We got two things here. How parents should treat children, which we got to get into if we have time. And somebody mentioned homosexuality. I'm going to say this about how many have heard of Alistair Beck? Alistair Beck, you've heard of him. He's another Protestant preacher. Now, when I'm on the road and I get offended by what they're saying on the sports stations or the news, I'll turn on Family Life Radio, and he's preaching on there. And he made a statement about homosexuality, which I thought was spot on. The world looks at homosexuality only one of two ways. Either they hate it or they affirm it. As Christians, we're called not to hate anyone. We got to love them, and we got to guide these people to Christ, who they desperately need. But at the same time, We cannot affirm sin. So as a Christian, we can do neither. Yeah. Yeah. Clear. Yeah. We cannot encourage it. We cannot affirm it. But as the individual, what did Jesus say? Hate the sin, love the sinner. We have to love them. It's a very hard and narrow road that we need to walk. And as he was saying this, I thought he's right. We got to love the individual, but we have to not affirm what they do. We have to call it out as what it is.
Yes, I suppose this is going to be on YouTube, so I have to be politically correct. In the process of loving the individual, does the institution need to bend to the wind of the individual?
No.
And that's my issue. Homosexuals are not just saying, okay, I'm homosexual. They're saying, I want the society that I'm a part of to embrace me.
I understand. They want us to affirm what they do, and we
Right.
cannot do that.
And they have a strong campaign to do that, and right now they are increasing their power in the United States.
Oh, yes.
I think adultery, polygamy.
All that stuff,
I
yeah.
think polygamy is actually a type of adultery, but in some cultures, a woman has no rights.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she doesn't have a connection to a man. She's basically a death sentence.
Oh, yeah.
And so in cultures like that, I think our church has had some difficult decisions to make.
Yep.
And as for homosexuals, I wrote during the time of one of our presidents to a certain party, spoke about a new law that was being put in, and the party wrote back, "You're no longer a member of our party if you take this moral stand." They didn't use the word moral. I spoke against it. We do not legislate morality, and yet our society is becoming so immoral. What does the Bible have to say about it? Sodom and Gomorrah is a very loud evidence of what God thinks about it.
I think that got back, what social change, what should we be doing as a Christian, but I think it all starts as an individual, how you're going to live. Not necessarily the church, but as you corporately as a whole, how you decide to live your lives and so forth. And I think, again, we have to look at things who Christ looks at things. I never saw, when these women were brought to him in adultery, caught in adultery, did she commit adultery? Was she guilty? Did she deserve to be stoned? Yep.
But there's always two, and then Jesus' answer was the right answer, was it
Yeah.
not? He knew what the law was. He'd written the law.
Yeah.
There's stoning for breaking the Sabbath. There's stoning for infidelity. There's stoning for rape. And then there's stoning for
Adultery, which somebody had to
bestiality
commit
and
with her.
everything else.
Yeah.
But Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.
Yeah.
The second part is really important. Neither do I condemn you, but don't go advocate it with pride. Go and sin no more. Don't we need to follow his example?
Yep.
Where you're going?
Yes.
I think one reason why God did Sodom and Gomorrah is that we would have had an HIV epidemic way back there.
Well, there would have been problems very much. I want to go on to the children question here, so forth, because my daughters, they're both yes, stick your My daughters are both graduates of GLA and Andrews. Now, Natalie, I'm going to put you on the spot here. How many of your former classmates would you say are still in the church from GLA? If you had to guess, and I'm sure it's guess.
Honestly, I don't keep up with many people from GLA. It's really hard to tell. I know there's a lot of social media posts that I'll see where it looks suspicious. Like, I remember one girl got married and she posted pictures from her bachelorette party, and the picture was strategically blurry, so you couldn't tell what, whatever vial of liquid she had in her hand, you couldn't tell what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So my guess, I know I have classmates who are in the church. I know I have classmates who are probably just nominally in the church. I honestly have no idea. I know for my sister's class, it's only like maybe 25% are still in the class, or still in the church, because she had a hard class. But it varies. It's not ideal numbers. Let's just put it that way.
Now we have a strong institution. We have church school. We have Pathfinders. We do a lot for our children, yet, pardon? They still walk away. You had your hand up?
Okay, so, you know, we send all of our kids through church school. One of them graduated from Andrews. Okay, and this is what I see in looking at all the kids, because I had Pathfinders for 13 years. Okay, what we do is we teach them the trappings and the traditions of the church, but we don't teach them to have a relationship with Christ. Okay, so you get up to Andrews, if you skip, especially in Lamson Hall, if you skip worship, you know, Mama gets a note, and we're gonna pay a fine because you didn't go to worship. You need to study.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worship credits.
They're not having church because they want to go and see Jesus. They're going to church so they can get up, get breakfast, and leave church and have that one meal that they're going to serve. We're not teaching them.
Who's not teaching them?
Our institutions.
Our institutions, or
No. Listen, because I've taught in church school too, and homeschooled and all that, and all the curriculum talks about Jesus. But I can talk to you about Jesus all day long, but if I don't show you how to have a relationship with Christ, if I don't teach you how to pray and lean on Jesus, then this is just what the family does on Saturday. It's not in their hearts.
Okay,
And that's why so many of them are gone. But the Lord said that my word will not come back to me void. And all of those seeds that we planted, I've seen Pathfinder after Pathfinder go out and do crazy stuff. And the Lord is still, those seeds are there, and they're planted, and they will come back. They'll come back.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Somebody over there.
I've told many times in this church that my fondest memory of my father
I've heard this one I wanted to bring back. You want to
is every morning he spent his first hour with God. And I grew up knowing that. And I grew up wanting to be like my father. And I think many don't learn because they don't have the example set for them.
It starts in the home, doesn't it?
Yep.
As a young adult, I had a real crisis of faith based off of how I was treated as an adult by the people who were in the church already, by the adults in the church. Now that I was becoming an adult, they didn't treat me in a way that was very, very well received. And so that made me go, do I even want to be a part of this church?
Church is very social for a lot of people, isn't it? Very much. I think Ken will say the same thing because he was raised a Catholic. Catholic Church isn't very social, is it?
I remember they had their events. They used to have Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
And they'd have pictures, and the priest would have a beer. They had, sometimes they had pancake breakfast. But one thing I thought when I joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church is that it was easier to talk to people before and after service, which kind of like extends the worship service into a more personal level. And in Catholic Mass, it's more formal.
It's 45 minutes. And
right.
You're done.
You get there, and then you leave.
Yeah. So. It freaked me out when I started joining the Adventist Church when people were inviting me home after Sabbath to dinner, and I'm like, well, I don't know you. Why would I go to dinner?
Part of that is when we're in church, okay, so my grandmother was Baptist, and they kept Sabbath in ways that we can't even imagine. Okay, y'all, we don't even know how to keep the Sabbath like they did. Okay, we don't have anything else that we're gonna do on the Sabbath but go home and have dinner. We had, before the pandemic, we had a party every Sabbath because you had dinner and you had friends over every Sabbath. Okay, as a Presbyterian, when church was over, we go to the movies. Mama came home and cooked Sunday dinner. You might be doing laundry to get ready for the week. So we don't have anything else to do. So you're gonna get together.
Yep.
And to Jennifer's point, when we send the kids off to GLA, all of their friend group, and then they go off to Andrews, all of their friend group is from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jennifer, Clarissa, Amanda, Nicholas all came home and nobody's here. And they weren't received well. My girls went to a public college. They were treated like they had leprosy. Okay, so, it's all of us. But again, when we teach them to have a relationship with Christ, it helps to bring them here. Okay, Jennifer was one of my pathfinders. Some of my seeds are in that baby's heart. Okay.
To piggyback on that, we've seen it in Pathfinders over the years. I had one that, I've seen a few of them, but I think the best example didn't happen to me is a child that went way off the radar and essentially had like a prodigal son experience. Went far enough out to where something really went wrong. They wound up in prison, in jail, and had no one to call. They had their one person they could call. They knew they couldn't call their parents. They knew they couldn't reach out to anyone. They said, I know of one person I can reach out to that will be there. It's their old Pathfinder director.
Amen. One more, and then we got to conclude here.
My project in my dissertation was, what do we do in church that invites people to stay in the church and not leave? And I remember my major professor one time saying to me, because he and I totally disagreed on this, he said, I could come and walk down the center of the aisle with blinders on my eyes and sit in the front row and worship God and walk out with blinders. And I thought to myself, I didn't say, but I thought to myself, if that was the church, I wouldn't come back.
Yeah. We talked, the lesson is called extreme loyalty. And on my travels on the road, listening to the radio, one of the news programs was pointing out that the U.S. military is having a hard time getting recruits, except for one service, the Marines. And you want to know why the Marines? It isn't that they're offering them more money. The people that want to join Marines, they want to be a Marine. There's something about, there's some sort of mystique. And I thought, I wish our church was like that. That the reason I want to become a Seventh-day Adventist, the reason I want to be a Christian is I want to follow Jesus. They talked to some of these new Marine recruits and they said, I want to wear that uniform. And I had to admit, the Marines have the best looking uniform out there. I mean, it's sharp. Pardon? They want to prove something. But how much would we want to say, I want to be a Seventh-day Adventist? I want to wear that suit and tie and sport coat when I reach Sabbath. I want to wear my best. To conclude in prayer, dear Heavenly and gracious Father, may we want to have extreme loyalty to you, not because of anything we get, but only because we love you. In thy name forever. Amen.